You're listening to Cult Life with your host, Robin Jackson.
We're going back 35 years today. In 1985, the Watchtower released a book called Life, How Did It Get Here? By Evolution or Creation. The book was studied by Jehovah's Witnesses at their book studies, which normally in South Africa used to happen on a Tuesday night. And I remember being the reader for the group when this book was studied at the time. Now, the book is very eye-catching because of its illustrations and pictures and, high-quality photographs in there which supplemented the text. But little did I know that this very book was going to contribute to part of my awakening and subsequent exit from the Jehovah's Witnesses. I want you to note that I was still at high school at the time and did subjects like biology, physical science, which included chemistry. Now, I must say up front that I'm not going to dwell on the creation versus evolution debate in this show, but rather on the blatant dishonesty and misquotes of leading scientists in the field of evolutionary science, biology, paleontology, and anthropology by the Watchtower in this book. So that's what I'm going to be concentrating on. Now, during that time, we did not have the internet, so we had to go to libraries and consult encyclopedias for information and for references. And because of my interest in biology and science, that is exactly what I did. The reason I was fascinated by the topic. So what I found was this. I found that many of the quotes attributed to scientists in the creation book were misleading and blatantly taken out of context. Many were twisted to suit the Watchtower's narrative within the writings in the book. And I'm going to just quote a few examples, out of this book where the Watchtower Society was blatantly dishonest in how they quoted these experts to actually just suit their narrative. Now, the first quote I'm going to quote from the book is on page 15. And it says there on page 15, the scientific magazine Discover put the situation this way. Evolution is not only under attack by fundamentalist Christians, but is also being questioned by reputable scientists. Among paleontologists, scientists who study the fossil record, there is growing dissent from the prevailing view of Darwinism. Now, this quote comes from The Tortoise or the Hare in the Discover magazine, which was written by, the article was written by James Gorman in October 1980 and page 88. And I'm going to quote from that exact article where the Watchtower is quoting from. And it says there, Charles Darwin's brilliant theory of evolution, published in 1859, had a stunning impact on scientific and religious thought and forever changed man's perception of himself. Now, that hallowed theory is not only an attack by fundamentalist Christians, but is also being questioned by reputable scientists. Among paleontologists, scientists who study the fossil record, there is growing dissent from the prevailing view of Darwinism. Most of the debate will center on one key question. Does the 3 billion-year-old process of evolution creep at a steady pace, Or is it marked by long periods of inactivity punctuated by short bursts of rapid change? Is evolution a tortoise or a hare? Darwin's widely accepted view that evolution proceeds steadily at a crawl favors the tortoise, but two paleontologists, Niles Eldridge of the American Museum of Natural History and Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard, are putting their bets on the hare. So the disagreement among scientists is not over whether evolution is true or not, as the Watchtower wants you to believe in their quote, but how rapidly evolution occurs. It's a disagreement on the pace of evolution. So the Watchtower in this creation book deliberately misquotes out of context, takes the quote out of context to suit their narrative, which is blatantly and is dishonest. Quote number 2, and this comes from page 39 in the creation book by the Watchtower. It says there, at this point, a reader may begin to understand Dawkins's comment in the preface to his book. This book should be read almost as though it were science fiction. Now, where does this quote come from? This comes from Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene, which was published in 1976. And the actual quote, the full quote in the book is this. This book should be read almost as though it were science fiction. It is designed to appeal to the imagination, but it is not science fiction. It is science. Cliché or not, Stranger Than Fiction expresses exactly how I feel about the truth. Need I say more? Once again, deliberately quoting a scientist or an expert in the field out of context. Deliberately excluding the sentences that come after the quote that they put in their book, which actually gives a whole context to the quote. Quote number 3, page 42 of the creation book, and this is what it says. Richard Dickerson explains, it is therefore hard to see how polymerization, which is the linking together smaller molecules to form bigger ones, could have proceeded in the aqueous environment of the primitive ocean, since the presence of water favors depolarization, breaking up, which is the breaking up of big molecules into simpler ones, rather than polymerization. And the source, where does this quote come from? It comes out of Scientific America, September 1978, page 75. It's page 75. The next sentence, actually following the one above from the Watchtower, goes on to say, we shall have to face up to this difficulty. And then he goes on to actually address the purpose and the rest of the article. So for them to stop at that quote and not show how the author actually does go on to explain that difficulty which he's talking about and provide the answer is dishonest. Quote number 4. And this is from page 89. It says there, fossil hunter Donald Johanson acknowledged, no one can be sure just what any extinct hominoid looked like. Now, the source of this quote comes from Donald C. Johanson and Maitland from the book Lucy, The Beginnings of Humankind. And coincidentally, I actually do have a copy of this book in my possession, and this quote is out of on page 286, and it's a picture text to one specific species. It says there, no one can be sure what any extinct hominid looked like, and that's where the Watchtower quote stops. But the sentence goes on to say, with its skin and hair on, sizes here are to scale, with, and it's about 2 feet shorter than the average human being. So stopping in mid-sentence to with a quote to suit your narrative, and taking the whole sentence out of context and quoting it out of context is once again just shows you the blatant dishonesty of the Watchtower writer here. Quote number 5, and this is on page 143. It says there on page 143 of the Creation Book, zoologist Richard Lewontin said that organisms appear to have been carefully and artfully designed. He views them as the chief evidence of a supreme designer. It will be useful to consider some of this evidence. And the source of this quote comes out of the Scientific American article Adaptation, volume 239 of September 1978, page 213. And the actual quote, and I'll quote from that exact source, says that, the exact source says, the manifest fit between organisms and their environment is a major outcome of evolution. Life forms are more than simply multiple and diverse. However, organisms fit remarkably well into the external world in which they live. They have morphologies, physiologies, and behaviors that appear to have been carefully and artfully designed to enable each organism to appropriate the world around it for its own life. It was the marvelous fit of organisms to the environment, much more than the great diversity of forms, that was the chief evidence of a supreme designer. Darwin realized that if a naturalistic theory of evolution was to be successful, it would have to explain the apparent perfection of organisms and not simply their variation. So once again, the Watchtower stops mid-sentence and misquotes the zoologist. And interestingly, he himself, Richard Lewontin, was very unhappy about this when he actually saw this in print in the Creation Book. Quote number 6. On page 15, the Creation Book says, Francis Hitching, an evolutionist and author of the book The Neck of the Giraffe, stated, for all its acceptance in the scientific world as the great unifying principle of biology, Darwinism, after a century and a quarter, is in a surprising amount of trouble. Well, the actual truth here is that Hitching, yes, is an author, but is he an evolutionist? He's not in the sense of a evolutionary scientist. The Bible, God's Word or Man's, page 106, even says Hitching is a scientist. Now, the Bible, God's Word or Man's, is actually another Watchtower publication. So, in fact, Hitching only has schooling in Warwick, England, and he's a writer, but even worse, he's a paranormalist, writing books about pyramid energy, earth magic, dowsing, psychic research, and so on. So in his book, The Neck of the Giraffe, he actually attacks Darwin to make way for his own theories that some magical force caused evolution. And it's actually interesting that the Watchtower would quote and use as evidence a man that actually supports pyramid energy, earth magic, and psychic research, and so forth. So there are many more quotes in the Creation Book. As I said, this book was published in 1985, and you can look it up for yourself and cross-reference a lot of the quotes in this book. Even the Watchtower's latest brochures on creation evolution have been debunked. There are many writings and articles and video on YouTube and on social media that actually debunk a lot of the later writings of the Watchtower in support of this as well, and how blatantly dishonest they once again are in misquoting scientists. But I want to leave you with this. If the Watchtower has to stoop to devious misquoting and misrepresenting of scientists in their writings, it leaves a question mark over the ability of their teachings and doctrines to stand up to scrutiny and truth. So that's the show for the week. Tune in again next week, and thanks for joining me once again on the podcast. And don't forget to give the show a like or a thumbs up on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Would it be Spreaker, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, or wherever. So you can interact with me there, leave a comment, thanks for staying tuned, and I will catch up with you again next week. Bye for now.